1963, The Assassination Games by John Dorney. London, the end of November 1963, a time of change. The old guard are being swept away by the white heat of technology. Political scandals are the talk of the town. Britain tries to maintain its international role. Fanatics assassinate charismatic politicians, and Group Captain Ian Gilmore is trying to get his fledgling countermeasures unit off the ground. When his life is saved by a familiar umbrella-bearing figure, he knows something terrible is going on. Whilst Rachel investigates an enigmatic millionaire, and Alison goes undercover in an extremist organisation, Gilmore discovers a sinister plot with roots a century old. The Doctor and Ace are back in town. A new dawn is coming. It's time for everyone to see the light.
Doctor Who, 1963. The Assassination Games.
Starfire, what a needlessly melodramatic name.
Something the matter, Gilmore?
Nothing, Sir Toby.
Come along, man, spit it out.
If you really want to know, sir, everything.
Mutually assured destruction is a powerful threat, but that's its very problem. No one truly believes another country will voluntarily take an action leading to its own inevitable destruction. But an action it will survive, well, that's a different matter.
If nothing else, it's a huge leap of technology.
Well, I am a minor-level genius.
T-minus 5 minutes.
I might be able to get around it, but it'll take time. Even then, it's not certain.
Use this.
What is it?
One of the Doctor's gizmos. That'll distract the system.
If you say so. And it appears to work.
Wicked.
T-minus 2 minutes.
You're going to kill millions! I don't want people to die!
What did you think your missile does? Smack the enemy on the bottom and issue a stern reprimand?
T-minus 1 minute.
You've got me here. I think I deserve some answers. Why don't you tell me what's going on?
You know, Group Captain,
T-minus 30 seconds.
I've absolutely no idea.
Mess with us, and the flames of heaven will rain down upon you.
Hence the missile's name.
I've taken the fires of the gods themselves.
You're a modern Prometheus.
Quite.
I just blow things up.
Though I'd prefer it if you didn't feel the urge to blow up a nuclear missile.
T-minus 10.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
Whoever you are out of your depth. You're a dead man.
You might very well think that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
I think you'll find that's victory. Thanks for playing. Better luck next time.
All right, Philip, so this is the third one in the 1963 trilogy, and
it is. Do you want to go first?
Countermeasures.
Oh, you are going to go first. Go.
You always go first, though.
Well, exactly. I was going to say you should go first this time, but you were just going to do it anyhow, so that's good. Go for it.
Yeah, well, Countermeasures has been going for a little while by this stage. So this is like a prequel to Countermeasures, but a sequel to Remembrance of the Daleks. And looking at the blurb that I just read, it's almost happened the next week. Because if in Remembrance of the Daleks we've got Doctor Who being touted as coming onto the screen, that would have been the end of November 1963. And this is set the end of November, so it was like almost days after the events of Remembrance of the Daleks that this took place. So very, very interesting. And it starts out with Sir Toby Kinsella, who we know from the first box set, and I haven't heard it for so long. I really need to re-listen to Countermeasures again. But Toby Kinsella was a character that was introduced specifically for Countermeasures, played by Hugh Ross. And what a fantastic character. He's just got that silky smooth, sort of slightly untrustworthy voice that you never quite know whether he's telling the truth or not. You're never quite sure whether to trust him, but you just sort of can't help yourself. He's so self-assured, such beautiful casting. And yeah, so the first episode is heavily centered on the Countermeasures team. And I love the cliffhanger. I love the cliffhanger to the first episode with the Doctor being introduced to Captain Gilmore. He's situated himself in the government as a minister. So that was pretty good. And then the story continues on there, becoming more and more Doctor and Ace centric. So I really enjoyed this. A really cool bunch of villains created by John Dorney, and which we'll talk about a little bit later with him too. Just a really enjoyable story once again.
I think it's interesting in the sense of it's probably the one least connected to reality in one sense than the previous two, because
True. Absolutely true.
Even though the Beatles one wasn't, it's still very much entrenched in the 60s. It feels like the 60s. And the Russian one was very much entrenched in the whole Cold War idea. And so you got another one, still Cold War, naturally enough, but it actually, because it's the Countermeasures crew and it's the 1960s, it feels more like the Avengers, as in the British Avengers, not MC Universe.
Gotcha.
So it's got an unreality to it. So it's although it's hard hitting, it's a big adventure. There's lots of shooting, there's lots of gun battles, there's assassinations, but it's detached from reality in a slightly different way. So it has a different tonal feel to it. It's a lot of fun, and I mean, I adore the Countermeasures crew. I think the Countermeasures was a brilliant spin-off series. So it's nice actually getting their roots. But it's interesting, even though it takes place, must be end of 1963, just after Remembrance of the Daleks. Obviously, that both the Doctor and Ace have gone back in time before this starts, because they're both well entrenched in their worlds. The Doctor's gone back far enough to get him to run as a politician, to get himself elected as an MP.
That's
to
right.
Now be serving. So he's been serving for possibly years in the British government. So he's gone back in time to do all that. And at this point, though, so all those other...
I think at the end he makes mention that he has continued to stay on as a minister, but then he's come back.
That's right. He comes to pick up Ace, but he's come back from 3 years because he's wanted to keep serving his constituents.
Finished his term, yeah.
So he's done another 3 years and seen them out, and now come back to pick up Ace, having done the 3 extra years. And she's just blasé about it. And he does talk about the times that he's got to be careful because he knows there's lots of himself running around. And he talks about the fact there's 3 of his present incarnation as well as other incarnations. And so one of those other incarnations is Remembrance the Daleks, Sylvester, Seventh Doctor and Ace running around. So that's one of them. He has to avoid that whole incident happening, even though he's still serving as an MP. So when you think about what's going on, there's a lot of complexities happening in there.
Yeah.
I love the way that John's structured in terms of the first episode. It feels like a Countermeasures episode, in some ways more than a Seventh Doctor Ace. But that was actually quite typical of the period. So I like how the fact it runs like that. And then it becomes some major gun battles and adventures and motorbikes. There's a very interesting scene which struck me quite powerfully, was when they surrendered, because the British idea that if you show a white flag, then they'll do the honourable thing, and that gets broken in a fairly twisty, clever way. But it's just an interesting, powerful scene of what is the British soldier like? Where is honour? And what do you do when you've got two people on the same sides fighting each other, shooting each other because they're being deceived by another political force? So it's got all the elements I love. This has politics in it. It has the play of political life, people who can't be trusted having influence, and then it's got a great alien menace, which is a very Seventh Doctor, dawn of time alien, influencing people in the background, which is just very common for the Seventh Doctor, and with the circus of the Ragnarok and the Fenric and etc. etc. So it's got so many elements. It's such a typical Seventh Doctor Ace story, a very typical Countermeasures story, and the two have just smashed together in a beautiful 60s setting.
Absolutely. I can't think of anything else to say, Philip.
Well, maybe we should ask John Dorney what he thinks and how he came about writing some of this.
You really want me to keep that in the podcast?
I don't care.
Don't you? Let's keep it in then.
Okay, then let's go to John Dorney. John, thank you again for joining us, and we're looking forward to talking to you about the Assassination Games.
And I'm looking forward to talking about it. Yay.
Fantastic. So, it's okay. So you wrote this about 10 years ago. Do you remember the background in terms of why you were first asked to be part of this trilogy of anniversary stories?
I mean, not why I was asked specifically. I mean, I know it was, probably, as you say, a good 10 years ago, and I'd been doing a few of the monthly range stories by that point. So it's probably just kind of a natural enough person to ask. I think Alan, who's making the decisions, like my work, so just asked me to do it. And I think at least part of it probably helped. Obviously, the plan had always been to have it involving the countermeasures crew, and they know that I was quite heavily involved in countermeasures as the script editor and sometimes writer of some of those. So I was able to fix the whole thing around to make sense of it in my own particular way.
So this is kind of a prequel to Countermeasures? Is that
yes, it takes place, if I remember rightly, between Remembrance and the first run of Countermeasures. So technically, I think it's the first in-universe appearance of Toby Kinsella.
Yeah.
Yes, because we're all very suspicious of him during this particular story.
Yes, I mean, to be fair, you can often be suspicious of Toby Kinsella in a lot of stuff.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
I was going to say the whole first box set, I was expecting him to turn bad the whole time.
Yes.
And then you end up becoming very fond of him by the end. Yeah, so what had you been involved with in terms of Countermeasures up to this point?
I was script editor on it, and I had to guess, I think I'd probably written Sins of the Fathers. I don't think I'd done massively more than that. We're potentially working on series 3 at this point now. I'm not 100% sure. So I've always been sort of around for all the meetings and discussions of where it was going and things like that. Yeah, so I'd written that one, so I was probably the most familiar person with all the characters.
Yeah. So with the decision to make all these 3 stories all set in 1963, I guess the Countermeasures team was the natural place to go, having already appeared in Remembers the Daleks.
Yeah.
All those R's confuse me. So what do you know what the brief was in terms of you were given to what you had to write? Did you know it was going to be Seventh Doctor Ace?
No, I mean, yes, Seventh Doctor and Ace and the Countermeasures team. I can't really remember much more beyond that. I don't think the political stuff was there. I think we all basically looked at the years that we were dealing with to try and find something that was appropriate, because obviously the thing that leapt up to for me was the Profumo affair. Obviously you could do Profumo affair, but there's the vibe of politics and scandals felt very 1963 to me, because of course at least part of this was there was going to be lots of emailing back and forth between me, Johnny and Eddie to make sure we all covered different things. But I went away and read a couple of You've Never Had It So Good and White Heat, which are 2 books by a historian about the 60s, and I can't remember his name. He's very good, and he went on to do one about the 70s. It was really interesting reading this history of UK in the 60s and looking for the bits that really leapt out at me. Weirdly, I did a lot of this reading whilst I was not on tour, but at the Edinburgh Festival in 2012. And I was doing a play called Coalition by Tom Salinsky and Robert Kahn, who then went on to write various Big Finish audios. The play also included in the cast Phil Morine, who then went on to write several Big Finish audios. So it's quite Big Finishy. And there was one day when, because of the vague Doctor Who connection, Sophie Aldred was up there, and I think she came to see it. So I was genuinely backstage reading through the book that I was reading to research the script that I was going to be writing for her, which is quite sort of fun. And weirdly, I think some of that play influenced, because that was quite political. I remember when I wrote up the storyline, I submitted an aspect of it which had a guy, the gangster, if I remember rightly, is also the chief whip. It's the same, pretending to be both people. And Alan sent a note back going, you can't have someone pretending to be the chief whip, because that's like, hiring someone, as the presenter of Gardener's Question Time or whatever, TV thing. And I was pointing out, going, no, you've been misled by House of Cards, which was about Ian Richardson as the chief whip, because I was doing this play which involved a chief whip. I knew that the chief whip is secretive and doesn't go on camera and isn't widely known. So he's exactly the best politician you could hide as, because nobody knows who the chief whip is. Well, we probably do if we look it up, but you wouldn't necessarily recognise who it is at a glance.
Well, it's like the new Speaker of the American House was the chief, assistant whip, and no one knew who he was either.
Yeah.
You mentioned House of Cards there. I was just wondering how much of influence that had. Sylvester does say the famous line of, "You might possibly think that, but I couldn't possibly comment."
Oh yeah, that was in That was in there. Also, the other thing that I think is a fairly obvious influence is Moonraker, with a bit of the plot is sort of a bit of riff on the book of Moonraker specifically. So yeah. So those things are in there. And House of Cards, I watched. I think I watched lots of sort of political dramas though. So there was also I remember doing a Very British Coup. I think.
Yep.
The sort of magnificent central. Well, a big role for Geoffrey Beevers in it, from what I remember. And I think I did some others, but I can't for the life of me remember what they were at the moment, I'm afraid. But yeah, just generally to get a sense of politics and being in and around politics.
One thing that struck me was you were writing this in the 2010s for Ace, who was set in the 1980s. The story was set in the 1960s. She was bringing up a lot of anachronisms from the 1980s. One thing in particular that made me smile was she called one of the main characters Sir Humphrey. So obviously she's referring to Yes Minister. But then that made me smile because I love Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister myself. But I was thinking, what is Ace doing watching Yes Minister? Is that the kind of thing she would have watched?
I mean, she could have had it in the cultural zeitgeist. That's the way I always kind of go with these things, as a degree of an excuse. You can never tell. Or maybe the Doctor wants to fill her in on, watch it with her at some point. Introducing her to because he's undercover, so he presumably had to train her up with the way politics work.
Dial it up on the time-space visualizer.
Yes.
You got 6 main characters because you're treating all the Countermeasure crew as main characters. That you don't push anyone really to the background. How do you go about plotting and setting up for running that many main characters with their own different storylines?
I mean, with great difficulty, I remember. I think I was aware that I would probably hold back on Sir Toby a little bit because he could be a bit distant. But then I imagine it's usually just, from my memory, it's like pairing people off, usually. So I think as well there's a very distinct vibe. I read some reviews at the time where people said that they thought it seemed like a countermeasure story that the Doctor and Ace had just been dropped into. But I think that's a completely mistaken take on it because I think people tend to judge what a story is from right from the get-go. And the first episode is heavily the countermeasures theme and less the Doctor and Ace. But by the time you get to episode 4, it's almost entirely the Doctor and Ace with the countermeasures theme very much in the background. And it's things like that factored into it for me. That I'd kind of shift the focus in the way as the story went through, depending on what the story needed to be. Obviously, there's a degree to which, and certainly one of the reasons I don't think it's a countermeasure was because there's loads of stories where the Doctor is barely present in the first episode. I think like House of Blue Leaves was relatively like that, Protect and Survive. So it's something to do, yes, where I felt very much of his period, certainly his audio period. Yeah, so it's all those things kind of factored in.
I was actually felt a bit like a new adventure novel in lots of ways, with the Countermeasure crew, because it's the realism is quite gritty, so it felt a bit more new adventure-ish in some ways.
Yes, yeah, that probably kind of went in there to a degree. Yeah, I read all of those, so they were part of my sort of mental landscape. Even though obviously I don't think I've read any of them since they came out in the 90s. So only sort of there in the background, but like a lot of these things, they all kind of feeds in and factors in.
I guess you had to have the Doctor and Ace in the background to build up to that cliffhanger in episode 1 with the Doctor revealed as the Minister.
That was always there from like really early on in my ideas. I think that was sort of the thing I built the hook around. One other bit I quite like, this sounds again really strange because it feels weird to say that this is that long ago, was when I was writing it. I think maybe even on the same day, I wrote a scene towards the beginning. And then I went to the cinema to see Skyfall, which had just been released. And I realised that I had a sequence which was an assassination in the Houses of Parliament, and then a race to a train station, and it kind of goes the exact other way in Skyfall when there's from the tube to Parliament, which I was quite chuffed with, really.
One of the things the Seventh Doctor is most famous for is in terms of dealing with these huge creatures from before the dawn of time, villains. like Fenric, etc.
Yes.
So you created did you create the light? Was that your
The light.
concept?
Yeah, they were mine. Yeah, and they were just fun. I can't remember where they came from. I think, yeah, I think again, vaguely being aware of the Illuminati as a concept, and people being paranoid conspiracy theorists all the time. It was all in my brain. So yeah, I think they came from that, and then we decided to pick them up again in the Countermeasures series proper, because it felt like they were a big enough threat and big enough foe that it was worth dealing with. But yeah, there felt like there were loads of strong ideas to be built around that, with the idea of these sort of secret rulers of the universe thing, which I still really like as an idea. I feel I could bring them back at some point still. They're fun.
No, I was going to ask you, have you thought about bringing them back? Because they have a lot of potential in terms of influence, and I guess it's the secrecy behind it all, and the power control and stuff.
Well, it feels very McCoy, doesn't it? It feels like that they're a good match for him, because he's so behind the scenes manipulative, and they're behind the scenes manipulative. All these things I really rather liked. I think I'd written it down actually in my notes ideas list as something like a cuckoo monster, aliens that infiltrated, and I thought that way, which I felt was where it probably is another factor where it came from.
So how much politics were you deliberately trying to insert in terms of the storyline and character play?
As in, I mean, I don't think making any political comments, but I really wanted it set within that world to feel of that world. So yeah, it was fairly definitely factored in. Also, because there is something about assassination I find inherently disturbing, because I think it kind of is really, because it's news. It's usually always murder, and it's usually always public, and the creepiness of that I find is very evocative. But so it all kind of tied into politics there. I don't think I did plenty of research, so I meant that somebody tweeted me or said something to me at one point saying, "Oh, John, there isn't a deputy prime minister in 1963." I go, "Yeah, that's why I could kill him." Because everyone I killed, those jobs don't quite exist, so it sort of still fits around the real history-ish, if you squint. But yeah, so not masses, I suppose, is the answer, because I didn't want it to be about politics. There was a plot beyond that, but yeah, it factored into it clearly. Yes.
It was similar to Johnny Morris in his story, The Space Race, when he was researching the Russian history at the time. Because there were so many gaps in there, he could invent certain amounts of history too. So you're doing something in a similar way there.
Yeah, if you're doing one that's actually set in 1963, you've got to use some of the actual things from 1963. But at the same time, yeah, you can't suddenly have Harold Wilson murdered. So it's all kind of problematic on those terms. So yeah, finding ways around that was part of the joy of it, really. Yes.
Interesting. Assassination had a fairly key theme in Johnny Morris's too, because he's got the assassination of Kennedy as part of the central idea of some of the things that he's doing as well. So the assassination of prime ministers becomes a bit of a theme across 1963.
Well, yeah, again, that's the other reason I think I went for it was because it was, again, that's the other thing we associate with 63 is the assassination of President Kennedy. So it feels like that combined with Christine Keeler all kind of fed into what I was aiming for. Felt doing politics and assassination felt like it was the area to be aiming for. It's good having this conversation because I'm reminding myself of the things that actually inspired it. Now we're talking it through.
I'm glad we can remind you what you're thinking 11 years ago when you wrote this.
Yes, exactly.
You were writing for 6 very well-known voices in your head. Is knowing those voices so well a hindrance for a writer or a help for a writer?
Oh, it helps. 100% it helps. For me anyway, because I can imagine the performances and I can imagine the way they'll deliver the lines, and they'll always come in and surprise you, but it really helps like differentiate the characters and give them all the different vibe. I will advise people if they're writing something to like imaginary cast it as well. So it could not necessarily somebody who could ever play the part, but necessarily even people who are alive, but someone where you know their voice and that's the voice of the character you want. So you can keep the voice of the character consistent throughout, really. And so that made life a hell of a lot easier, really, because they're all very distinct people to write for with very distinct vocal performances that helped me through it. Really, yeah, it was very fun to do.
And it worked out to be a very large cast. Was budget ever an issue for you? Or you just wrote and let someone else worry about that?
I did keep an eye, but I was also very aware. I'm very careful when I do these things of how the characters are split up. So I don't think all of the guest casts were in on the same day, because we were able to balance it around the two discs quite carefully. One of them was my old drama school colleague Gerald Kidd, which was quite a delight. I think he was only in for one day, and he was playing the chief whip, from what I remember. And
he played 3 characters in the end. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's chief whip and the gangster. Yeah, and it was really lovely to see Gerald, because I hadn't seen him in a while at the time. The voices and the multiple characters. Yeah, it's also with that. I did enjoy the fact that I could use the doubling as a disguise. So because people would assume these people were just being doubled by the same actor, but no, they're the same person, but just pretending to be multiple people. It's quite a nice idea, really. So yeah, that was fun to do.
Good. Anything in the production that you would change now?
I mean, not really. I still feel very proud of it. It's a favourite of mine, and it's one I really liked writing, and I think it's got the right kind of tone and style and grittiness to it. That I don't think I would. I think it all came together in pretty much the exact way I'd like it to.
If you enjoyed what you heard in this clip from the Sirens of Audio podcast, be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you never miss out on another episode from us. And if you want to find out more about us, including our back catalogue of episodes, you can head over to sirensofaudio.com.